Welcome to this fourth session on the theories of consciousness, where we will go through and describe integrated information theory. Integrated information theory, or IIT, is similar to all the prior theories of consciousness in that it wants to explain what is the difference between a conscious mental state and an unconscious mental state. So for IIT, integrated information theory, the main question is what conditions need to be present before a system can be said to be conscious or have consciousness. And what I want you to notice here is that I didn't say the brain, I said a system. And that is because, as I will describe later, IIT and the theory of IIT actually proposes several ways in which we could think about and even measure how AI systems or advanced computer systems can be said to be conscious, to have consciousness. At the core, IIT proposes that consciousness is the capacity of a system to integrate information. And IIT is a relatively new theory, which was developed by the neurologist Giulio Tononi. And one thing to note here is that the theory is still in development, with the latest theory, IIT 3.0, which was presented in 2014, although it's very much still in development. And it's also important to know that the IIT is a well-structured theory in how it's presented, and it's intriguing with a lot of combinations of different fields, combining mathematics, philosophy, and neuroscience. Although it can be difficult to understand, so it's okay if it's a little bit hard to understand this theory. It can be a bit abstract. But to begin to explain and to understand, it helps to mention that in the study of consciousness, the biggest issue is what's called the hard problem of consciousness, which is, why do we have phenomenological experience or qualia at all? Why does it feel a certain way to be alive and to think and feel? And that information is first-person centered. And you have privileged access to this type of information about how you feel. No one can ever, from a third-person point of view, experience your consciousness. It becomes, and when that is the fact, it becomes difficult to build a scientific understanding of consciousness, because science typically involves physical states as well as data that can be verified from a third-person point of view. So the hard problem is thus, how do you start from physical principles of the brain or any system and then arrive at consciousness and phenomenological experience? So the idea behind IIT is that you shouldn't start from physical principles, but instead you should approach the problem by accepting phenomenological experience as sort of real and with real characteristics and a certain structure about phenomenological conscious experience, and then propose physical processes that might be able to account for how conscious experience is in that way. Or in other words, IIT proposes that the hard problem of consciousness, to solve the hard problem of consciousness, we need to take offset in phenomenology and then propose physical mechanisms or characteristics that can account for that phenomenology. And it does this using phenomenological axioms. And then, so axiom is something that is self-evident, or something that is already accepted or established. And then from these phenomenological axioms, it comes up with physical postulates, or it proposes physical characteristics that might explain why those phenomenological axioms are the way they are. So, and these axioms are called existence, composition, information, integration, and exclusion. And we are going to go through all of them here. So the first axiom is called existence. And this is a self-evident characteristic of experience that you've probably heard, which is, I think, therefore I am, by Descartes. You could say that, I would say it differently. I would say that you experience, therefore I am, or I experience, therefore I am, you experience, therefore you are. And this is a very important axiom. Basically, all you know for absolute certainty is that you are experiencing something right now. And this is also when you're dreaming or when you're experiencing an illusion. Even if you're experiencing something that's false, you are still absolutely, with absolute certainty, experiencing something. It is self-evident. And this is the first axiom. So the second axiom is composition, which is that experience is structured. Every experience has aspects that have a certain structure. When you see a scene like this, you see a book, a case, a hand, and even when you experience darkness, your experience is still structured around that darkness, that aspect of darkness. The third axiom is information. And IIT uses the original definition of information, meaning something when something is in form, meaning the way it is or its nature, information. By this axiom, IIT observes that experience is differentiated, meaning your experience is one out of many you can have. And it's unique because it's different from all other experiences that you could have or possibly have. You're experiencing certain components which defines the content of your experience, and this makes it a particular experience you are having, which is differentiated from all the experiences you could have. The fourth axiom is integration. So every experience is unified, meaning one. It cannot be reduced to individual components. So if you see a red ball, for example, you see the ball and you also see red, but you cannot divide yourself into two parts where one of you only sees the ball and another one sees the color red. The experience is a whole experience. It is unified or integrated. And it might be that individual parts of the brain are processing different aspects, but in the end, your experience is unified into one. It's integrated. And the last axiom is exclusion. Experience is unique. It is only one, and it's confined to just one experience. The experience isn't more or less than what it is. It's not slower or faster than it is, and thereby, it proposed by IIT, it has boundaries that separates it from other experiences. It is exactly that experience and nothing else. It has these boundaries to it. It's not something else as well. Now, these axioms, all of these axioms or self-evident statements about phenomenology is then used by IIT and feed into these physical postulates. Or you could say, for everything we know true about experience, IIT proposes some physical processes which might capture that mechanism. So we're going to go through them here, and this for the first axiom, existence, that your experience is a real thing and is the only thing you know for absolute certainty. What IIT proposes is that this must mean that there exists causal powers underneath the system mediating this, and a sort of dynamic cause and effect system. If your experience is real, then it must interact with other things that are real. If consciousness exists, then it should be affected by things and it should have its own effects. So something from outside the system and from inside the system should have effects on the system. So roughly translates to neurons in the brain that, for example, are caused by some electroconvulsive shock to those neurons. Those neurons become active and they causally affect each other. So there must be some sort of causality in the system. And implicit here is that there are different elements in the system which have causal effects on each other. The second axiom was composition, meaning that experience is structured around aspects, these individual aspects. Experience has many aspects. So IIT explains this as the physical postulate for this is that the system mediating consciousness must also have individual parts that it is made up of and constituting different aspects of experience. The system must be built by these different elements that take on various combinations. Sometimes these are on or off, sometimes they are together, sometimes they are isolated from each other, but these make up or composite the conscious experience. The third axiom was information. Your experience is the way it is out of many. It is a particular mental state. And the physical postulate here for a state to be this specific is that it can only be very specific because of that cause and effect structure, or the previous causes and effect structure. Or you could say all the events in the past, all the firings of your brain will eventually lead to the specific way in which your brain is firing right now. This very, very moment, the activity in your brain is probably a type of activity that it's never going to be the same again, because it is shaped the way it is throughout your whole life. And therefore, the cause and effect relationship is crucial for the experience you're having right now to be so specific and so differentiated, so specific that it's one out of many. And what is termed in IIT is the cause and effect repertoire, meaning that the causes have something, these different elements in the system have causes and effects on each other, and these are a way of saying that the system can be tracked, so to speak. Yeah, and the fourth axiom is called integration, and this is a really important one. So experience is unified, it is whole, meaning it cannot be reduced to individual parts. So if you reduce existence to individual parts, then there's no reason to have the idea or the experience of a whole unified experience. So the physical postulate is here that integration makes the system completely irreducible. It also means that if you removed part of the system, even a very small part of the system itself would be completely different, because the system integrates different aspects, or every aspect. And IIT proposes here that integration can actually be measured with a number called phi, which is a way to quantify how integrated the information in the system is. And it does this by looking at the cause and effect repertoire and actually cutting it literally in half, removing certain causes and effects of the system and seeing how the system changes. Then you calculate what are the cause and effect repertoire that are left after you perform the cut, and calculate the difference before and after the cut is performed. And you can sort of take out partitions of the system that does the least to this measured integration of the system, and that difference will give you a measure of how integrated the system is, or how irreducible the system is. So that sounded very abstract, because it is, and this is something that's a bit difficult to understand. So instead of consciousness, we can take another analogy here. So for example, we could take your personality, which is a product of everything you've experienced, your genetics, your upbringing, the influences of your friends, your life, and so on. And who you are right now in this very moment is defined by all of those processes. All of those causes and effects lead up to who you are exactly right now. And these effects all integrate into who you are right now, your personality. Now, let's imagine the most insignificant thing in your life. It could be something completely unimportant, which you would say, affected you the least in your life. And let's say that we removed that from your life, and we were still able to measure how all of those aspects, how all of those effects and causes integrate into each other. But now we have a version of you where we remove the most insignificant part. What we would then be able to measure is the difference between you're complete, and you without this insignificant experience. We would be able to measure what is the difference in integration. And that would give us an estimate of integration, or phi, for your personality, you could say. To what extent is your personality irreducible? How important is integration for that system? And this phi is then not, this analogy with personality, it is exactly the same thing, you could say, with consciousness. And this phi that Tononi proposes has over many years not just been used in computer simulations, but also to measure electrical activity in the brain, where you can start to see that phi, for example, can be used to discriminate altered states of consciousness, sleeping, or states of anesthesia. So the last axiom is that of exclusion. Your experience is one out of many. It is a particular mental state. Experience is unique, it is the only one, and it's confined to just one experience. And that experience has boundaries which separate it from other experiences. So exclusion means that we don't experience consciousness as a lot of mini sensations. There are perhaps states in the brain of the system that make up the brain. So for example, some area of the brain might be involved in fear processing, like the amygdala might be involved in fear processing, but there might be other neurons, there might be other small subset of nuclei that might be processing information, and that might be also active when you're processing fear. And these neurons, when you combine them together, can sometimes lead to a lower phi, or a lower estimate of integrated information. And the exclusion proposal is that you should take the part of the system that leads to the maximum phi because of exclusion. So what happens is the entire brain is integrating all information. It excludes or suppresses the components that are unimportant. You could say the mini brains, mini experiences that are unimportant for the maximal phi. And this ultimately leads to experiencing a single mental state. And IIT proposes that this can be calculated using this cause and effect structure, which is thus maximally irreducible. So once you have all of these axioms translated to physically defined in sort of formal mathematics, you are able to say that the individual elements of the system, so A, B, and C, in that particular state, is a maximally irreducible conceptual structure, which is exactly the way it is because of its cause and effect repertoire over time. And taken together, this is called a complex or a quale, and this you can plot into specific constellation, like a sort of star map, where you define the past and future of that quale. And for integrated information theory, this is the answer to what are the conditions necessary for consciousness. It is the elements in the system that integrate information which are maximally irreducible. For the reason conscious experiences take this type of form, or the way a conscious experience feels in a certain way, it is because this structure contains these elements, and the system takes on these elements, or also called conceptual structure. And the quantity of the experience, or how much of you or anyone is conscious, the degree to which someone is conscious, is the amount of phi, or the maximally irreducible estimate of integration. Now, because IIT is defined in formal mathematics, this actually allows it to be possible to ask if computer systems like AI are actually conscious. And this leads to some interesting ideas actually proposed by some of the leading proponents of IIT. So for example, is Siri on your iPhone, is that conscious? And you can ask how well does Siri integrate information, or you can ask questions like sci-fi movies like the movie Her or Ex Machina, which all deal with artificial intelligence systems, robots basically, and whether those robots can be conscious. This is discussed as a possibility by IIT. So in sum, integrated information theory is a mathematical and neuroscientific theory based on phenomenological observation. The core idea of IIT is an observation of phenomenological axioms or self-evident truths about conscious experiences, which can be translated into physical postulates, physical properties, proposals of how the system would operate in order to allow for such phenomenological axioms or phenomenological experiences. And the components of existence, composition, information, integration, and exclusion can be defined mathematically as the cause and effect of the system. And in sort of a one-liner, it is a physical system that contains intrinsically existing elements which interact, constituting each other through their composition. This interaction depends on how the elements are formed, or in which form or information they take on, and thus the interaction of the elements can't be separated. They depend on integration to such an extent that there emerges specific boundaries for the system as a whole, or exclusion. Yeah. So that is integrated information theory, and one of the ways in which you can measure this integration is using this phi. And IIT is intriguing because of the possibility it makes for AI systems to be conscious. Yes, so that was integrated information theory. Thank you.